Hi everyone, I'm Perry. Welcome to Living Your Best Life with Eddie Stone, founder and CEO of Touchstone Essentials. Hello Eddie, how are you?
I'm great, Perry. So nice to be with you this evening and with our listening audience.
Glad to have you here with us too, Eddie. You have anything to say first before we start?
You know, I feel like I've got a lot to say, but yet I don't, I don't want to waste our time here. But I will say I am happy that stateside, and I think you're experiencing well, weather is warming up for everybody, and we're kind of climbing out of the winter. Definitely climbing out of the winter here. We've already got into sort of our summer storm season. Where I live in North Carolina, we actually have a great deal of thunder and lightning, which can be, unfortunately, quite dangerous this time of year. I think it's maybe Florida and North Carolina in the U.S. that have the most fatalities and other issues with it. But the spring, I love looking outside at the new leaves on the trees and the deep green colors. And where I live, we have a flowering a tree called a dogwood that's quite beautiful, as well as bushes called azaleas. And in fact, for anybody that's maybe not from North Carolina, but they watched the Masters golf tournament this past weekend, which I think is a pretty large global event, the flowers or the bushes on there that are flowering are azaleas. And so we have our azaleas here. And so it's a beautiful time of the year, but man, do we have a lot of pollen. I find myself doubling up on the zeolite every day this time of year. Otherwise I get really, really congested and struggle a little bit. So there's so much pollen that when you walk outside, there's kind of a yellow film on the ground and cars that are in parking lots. I don't know if you have that same scenario where you live, but so really throughout the entire Southeast, and I was in Houston a couple weeks ago, they were experiencing it well. So it's an interesting phenomenon. It's so yellow, Perry, that you would think it's going to stain something, but of course a good rain and it, washes away. So it's really interesting.
And is it good? Is it okay for health when people breathe in?
Well, there are people with asthma or other acute pulmonary lung issues that I would think it would be an irritant and can cause a histamine reaction. And so they would take antihistamine medicines, which aren't, they probably help people get through the moment, but overall pretty challenging for the body to take things like Claritin or others on a regular basis. But for some people, they have such a strong reaction to it. It's probably the only way they get through, say, allergy season or pollen season, it would be called. And so I don't know, unless you have real problems with asthma or acute lung issues, it's probably just a nuisance for most of us that are healthy and have a healthy immune system. But of course, if you don't have a healthy immune system, if you're dealing with some kind of compromised health matters, there's spring flus and colds that can also be very, very challenging. I mean, it's the time of the year where unfortunately, you'll read about very young children or older adults that will actually die associated with spring flus. And so it's, if they have those challenges, it's something they really got to pay attention to.
Oh, okay. Wow, because I saw in the picture, it's kind of a lot, very dense, very yellow. So I don't know how people breathe.
If it's dry and the wind is blowing, it's almost like a yellow cloud, like a sand cloud. But it's here, and then a couple weeks later, it's gone.
Okay, Eddie, back to you. I have an article talking about cancer industry. Okay, so I like to know what you think about this. Let's say cancer industry profits locked in by Nagalese molecule injected into humans via vaccine spur tumor growth. One of the world's most lucrative industries spending on cancer drugs reached an all-time high last year as it was valued at more than $100 billion. Spending on cancer drugs increased 6.5% annually over the past 5 years and is expected to continue growing at a rate of 8% each year through 2018. What do you think about this?
Well, I do think very obviously there's a cancer economy. It's its own ecosystem that involves research and treatment and people that are getting, post-death issues and costs associated with it. I mean, it's almost, it's an economy. It's its own type of economy. And I I believe the genuine worry for people, and I think this is true, Perry, for even people at the American Cancer Society and research institutions, is that the cancer business is so big. Is there a chance that ethically the business of cancer could get in the way of the cure or the treatment of cancer? I have a family member right now at a cancer treatment facility in Houston, Texas, called MD Anderson. It's one of the largest ones in the entire world. It's a global center, multi-billion-dollar center. And to see it in the tens of thousands of people that work there and all the people going there for treatment, if all of a sudden cancer didn't exist, you can let your mind go, wow, what would happen, right? But if you back off a little bit about those worries, and I understand how you can develop a conspiracy about something like that, and you talk to the individuals involved, whether it's the doctors running the treatment, the nurses involved in the treatment, the care for patients, there's no individual there, that would be in the way of curing cancer, right? They're all individuals that some of them themselves have had cancer. They've had family members that have developed cancer and died from cancer. And they have a very stated commitment to try to treat, stamp out, cure cancer, whatever the proper terminology is. In fact, this one institution that I'm talking about, MD Anderson, they've got a physician on staff there that's won a Nobel Prize for his work with immunotherapy to treat cancer. And so you can kind of get overwhelmed by the cancer economy and say, well, maybe this economy is so large, people don't want to cure it. And I think it's easy, even for myself, it's easy to think of drug companies sometimes as villains, right? Because you wonder, do they want to get you to use the drugs on a repeated basis? Maybe it's a cholesterol medicine or whatever it happens to be, right, that you'll just use forever rather than trying to treat the problem. And maybe there's a corporate strategy there that creates a conflict of interest and ethics. But again, I go back to the individual persons, and I can't imagine, if there is a conspiracy, how they would control on an individual level that information getting out to us in the public. Because if they're doing something that promotes cancer, well, then they're going to have family members that suffer from it as well. So I understand the concern and have really mixed emotions about it. And at the end of the day, I have a general belief in people. I believe people are generally honest and good and well-intentioned. If I didn't believe that, I don't know if I could get up every day, right? I need to start out believing in people. And that's not to say that all people deserve that kind of faith and confidence, because we both have met, our listeners have dealt with people that are not of good conscience and ethics. And so I understand where the concern comes from. In terms of the extracellular matrix, so that article you're talking about this is something that's discussed quite a bit. It's an enzyme called negalase that it's basically a matrix of enzymes that are degrading, that are being admitted into the body by cancer. And I'm taking a really complicated subject, right, and trying to make it pretty simple. I mean, there's a lot of science and chemistry there. And in a very similar way, HIV does the same thing, as well as some forms of influenza, like I believe it was H1N1 a couple years ago, the chicken issue. And the reason those diseases or viruses do that is by admitting that out into the body, it disguises the cancer, it disguises the HIV, it disguises the influenza, so that the body's own natural immune system doesn't realize there's something to attack. If your body sees cancer, we have this built-in portion of our immune system called NK cells, which stands for natural killer cells, cancer killer cells, these large macrophages. If you looked at them under a microscope, they're huge compared to the other white blood cell parts of the immune system that will go in and kill a cancer cell. But if it doesn't recognize the cancer, then it can literally, I don't know if you remember the movies Harry Potter, and and the little kid Harry Potter had the invisible cloak he could put on, right? And people could walk beside him and not even realize he's there. Mm-hmm. Essentially, by emitting these degrading enzymes like that, that's what happens in the body. The immune system doesn't recognize the disease and therefore can't attack it. Immunotherapies like the one I just described, this guy won a Nobel Prize for, and that's not the only place where this is occurring. It's occurring all around the U.S. and other major medical centers around the globe, where, for example, at Duke University, not too far from where I live, they're giving certain types of cancer tumors, they're injecting them with polio, a form of polio that would not escape to the rest of the body, but they inject this into the cancer. And when they do that, it bypasses this degrading enzyme substance. And so the body all of a sudden sees this cancer tumor, recognizes it, and the body's own immune system turns on that tumor. And it's very promising. I mean, in our lifetime, I genuinely believe, I shouldn't even say in our lifetime, because you and I are going to live a long time. I think in the next 5 years, there are going to be significant portions of tumor-based cancers and others that will be rendered cured because of immunotherapy. Now, that's only a portion of what we deal with cancer, but there will be a certain subset that will be cured because they've got the ability now to not let cancer go invisible to the body's immune system. When they say that it's being put into vaccines, I think there's some misleading information there they're giving to the public. There's no question, we discussed this on our last show, that there's things in vaccines that are not healthy, heavy metals and other volatile organics, other environmental pollutants that we don't need in our vaccines. But in this case, those articles seem to be nefarious and suggesting that it's being put in there to create cancer and to develop this cancer economy. I just reject that. And I just reject that based upon the things I know and believe about society, that I just don't think that's the case. Do I think that there are some misguided decisions made by pharmaceutical companies and others that get in the way in the cure and the treatment? And is it possible that that economy is so big some people would be bad actors and maybe not want to see cancer cured? I don't know that. Those are bigger questions, and I think I have the capacity, but I just don't believe that on any kind of real basis they're trying to introduce cancer, prolong the livelihood of cancer in our society as the deadly disease just for money. There are other more criminal ways to make money than that. So maybe some of our listeners will think I'm naive, and that's okay. They're entitled to their opinion. I think I'm entitled to mine, but that's, as I understand the dynamics and my belief in people, I just don't think that's happening on a nefarious level, but that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I did have another question from my listener. Okay, he said if he can take zeolite with natural and homeopathic products. I am taking an antidepressants prescription drugs and found an amazing Chinese naturopathy and making the transition from the drugs to natural pills. I bought already the zeolite, but not sure if I can take it.
Well, in my history with zeolites, which goes back now almost 15 years, I'm unaware of any publications in Asia or Europe or in the U.S. that suggest there is a contraindication for the use of zeolites with homeopathic medicines. I think this person is referring to a naturopathic doctor in homeopathic medicines. And so I don't know of anything. If I were taking a homeopathic medicine, I would not hesitate to simultaneously use my zeolite. In fact, I use my zeolite all the time, no matter what else the heck is going on in my life. And so I'm unaware of anything in that regard. In fact, the only two allopathic drugs that I'm aware of, and that's not to say there aren't others, but the only two I'm aware of that would have a sort of a conflict, what we would call a contra impact, would be lithium, which is a heavy metal used a long time ago, a lot for people dealing with depression and other mental health issues. It is still used today, but not at the same rate. But if you had somebody that was getting mental health treatment using lithium, then the zeolites doesn't seem to make sense from what I understand. They would want to ask a physician. And the other one is if they're getting a platinum treatment for bowel, colon, or prostate cancer. And cisplatinum, which is a type of platinum that is turned into radioactive pellets that are injected into the affected area for a man with prostate cancer or some forms of colorectal cancer, that's a heavy metal. And, zeolites are attracted to and try to get rid of heavy metals. And so that would be a contra indication to what that's for. But those are super rare circumstances. For example, people that are dealing with cisplatinum for a treatment for prostate cancer would be told not to eat green leafy vegetables. In fact, they don't want them to have any type of antioxidants in their diet. So I think those things for somebody under drug care would be obvious to do their own research with their physician. But outside of that, I just have never heard of anything where the zeolite, remember the zeolite's an inert substance. So it's not going to, should not have any impact whatsoever on a homeopathic product.
Okay, thank you. Eddie, today, and you have anything to say about cooking oil, right?
I do. So we've been talking so much in the past couple months about food preparation and cookware. And then we had a dialogue. I feel bad that we didn't have a more definitive answer for a person that asked about what somebody could do in prison. But just given the limitations on what they can eat, it's a real issue. But I thought I would bring up something that isn't always thought about, and that's canola oil. Canola oil is the most popular cooking oil around the globe. And it's used in kitchens and homes. It's used in restaurants. I mean, it is used everywhere. And in part where this comes from is that decades ago, people used to cook with animal fat or what you would refer to as saturated fat. So they cooked with lard, beef talon, other things like this. And those things fell out of favor because the American Heart Association or around the world, people tracking heart disease felt like that the saturated fats that you find in something like lard would contribute to cardiovascular disease. Bearing in mind for the listeners that don't realize this, if you talk about something like cholesterol, which is its own controversial subject, but when you talk about something like cholesterol, the only way cholesterol can be introduced into your diet is through an animal product. There's no fruit, vegetable, grain that has cholesterol. It can only come from a meat product, a cheese, animal fats. Only animal products can deliver cholesterol through your diet. So this kind of logic several years ago made people start to turn away from using saturated fat in the preparation of food. And it also led them, like, for example, butter fell out of favor because it's a saturated fat. And so there was this big push, particularly in the States in the 1950s and 60s, and I know it spread to other parts of the world, where people used margarine. And margarine was generally made from vegetable oil. In this case, most of the time it was made from canola oil. And they superheated that vegetable oil, introduced a hydrogen molecule to it, and created a solid that looked like butter. And they could flavor it so it tasted like butter, but they were able to say to the public that it wasn't butter and it wasn't a saturated fat. The problem was, it turns out that it was a trans fat, and trans fats are much, much worse for you on a scale of probably 4 to 1 in terms of its negative impact against, say, saturated fat. So the data was actually really misinterpreted, and for decades, people were sent sort of this wrong direction. But nonetheless, canola oil really persisted. And the reason canola oil persisted to become this most popular cooking oil is because by using genetically modified canola, where they could make the canola resistant to Roundup. And that's about, when I say that, I mean, that's about 90% of all the canola used in the world is genetically modified so that it resists the herbicide Roundup. which we know is where glyphosate comes from. So it could be grown in almost any condition, and it could be grown very inexpensively. And so it became this cheap alternative, and since it wasn't a saturated fat, it wasn't villainized by the various heart groups that are out there. The problem is it brings all kinds of other issues or problems, because when it's superheated, just like the margarine in days gone by, it turns into a trans fat. Plus, that superheating turns it into an oxidized free radical that can damage your DNA. And so there's this cascade of negative impacts that can come from using it as a cooking oil. And truthfully, we shouldn't allow much of our food to be fried or prepared with cooking oil. I mean, just as a general rule, you'd like that to be a very modest amount of the consumption of calories that are coming from your diet is from frying or cooking with cooking oils. But the bottom line is these oils that through high heat, and they'll try to create them so that their structure creates a high heat point where they're not smoking at a low temperature, right? And they can be used in restaurants, and the oil doesn't then degrade. The reason they introduce the hydrogen molecules, they don't want the oil to degrade, so it can be used over and over, say in a restaurant to fry French fries or chicken or whatever it happens to be. And so this trans fat that's created is just horrible in terms of cardiovascular disease and issues, and it does other things. One is that we know it's a endocrine disruptor. And so it can interfere with the balance of hormones in your body, which can affect all types of issues, including your thyroid, but also affect your memory. So there's some real downstream impacts that are something to watch out for. There's a term called metabolic syndrome that we see when someone is showing signs of type 2 diabetes. They're gaining weight and they're showing risk factors for cardiovascular disease. That's a metabolic syndrome that's unfortunately identified with a growing part of our population here in the United States. Looking at people that live off of mostly ultra-processed food diets, very few fruits and vegetables, not a lot of exercise, they fall real victim to this. And the weight that they gain winds up being weight that's put on behind their abdominal muscles, not on the front of it. And the challenge with that is that weight then saturates inside the organs. And so literally people can find that their organs are surrounded by fat, which puts pressure on the organs, pressure on the hearts, pressure on the liver, pressure on the kidneys, pressure on the lungs. It's this real difficult issue. And we have a significant part of our population in the US and really the developed parts of the world, pretty common to see this. And of course, there's the GMO concerns and other issues. And so one of the things I try to encourage people to do is really think about the amount of frying or the amount of food preparation you're doing with a cooking oil. One, you want to limit that as much as you can. But when you're going to use oil, do everything you can to use coconut oil. And I know that coconut oil is obviously a saturated fat, but saturated fats aren't the villain here. It's and coconut oil can be harvested and grown sustainably. So there are some qualities there that are very positive for the survival of our planet. Olive oil is one of the most delightful flavored oils out there. We look at people that live in the Mediterranean, other parts of the world that have this incredibly high consumption of olive oil, and they almost have no heart disease. Even in societies in certain parts of Europe where their smoking rates are quite high, they don't particularly take to exercise, and they have these high fat diets, but the fat coming from olive oil almost seems to be like a protector of their bodies, at least looking at sort of this large population scale research against heart disease and cancer. So olive oil, I think, is quite remarkable and something that for anybody that really loves the flavor of oil, you want to have it in salad dressings or whatever, that's something to consider. And you want a good oil, pay attention to the sourcing of it. And then grass-fed ghee. Ghee is very popular in India and several other parts of the world. And a grass-fed ghee will have a natural base of minerals and things that are really good, very positive for your health. And then if you're trying to figure out what to substitute from a cooking standpoint, ghee, of course, ghee is a nice fat to cook with, since most recipes have a little bit of a butter-like indication, right? You'll see a cookie recipe that says a stick of butter, right? You can substitute ghee for that, but also organic applesauce. The right combination of applesauce and a little bit of ghee or even coconut oil, although that brings a flavor with it, can be a terrific baking substitute. And all of that, if a person will spend a little bit of time on Google, you can take your recipe and kind of Google a comparison to substitute out and make for a more healthy cooking environment. And I think if you do it right, no one's going to know the difference that you substituted out in your favorite recipe. So there's smart alternatives to canola oil, and it's something people should take a good hard look at.
Here in the past, I mean, in Thailand, Eddie, people use like animal fat, like pork fat, to cook food. And then things change. We use more like soybean oil, which I think that's not safe either, right?
Yeah, soybean oil doesn't seem to have as high a heat threshold. Certainly not as high as you would have with lard, which comes from pork, right? You typically think of saying lard and pork as a pork fat. Yeah, so something to consider. I would, again, if it's available and plentiful, coconut oil would be a better substitution than the soybean oil for sure. Even rice oil would be a better substitution. And I do notice in the States, a lot of places are starting to have rice oil in salad dressings and things like that. And rice oil has some healthy qualities too. I don't think as good as olive oil or coconut oil, but superior to soybean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I will consume more coconut oil to shift.
It's a good idea. In the States, there's a really popular drink. They call it bullet coffee. I think there is a brand Bullet, but essentially what it means is you whip a tablespoon of coconut oil into your black coffee in the morning. And it's really a popular thing, and certainly it's better than using dairy, but there's a lot of people that think it just gives them an extra kick and a little extra excitement to their morning coffee. So coconut oil, I think we could say safely coconut oil, it can be a really important part of a healthy diet plan.
Eddie, how about the coconut water? They said, can we drink every day? Because they said they have a high estrogen hormone too, so which is okay.
The organic coconut waters that I'm familiar with, I wouldn't have any hesitation to have my wife or daughter drink them on a daily basis. But I know that the sourcing, you need to look closely at where it's coming from, and is it reconstituted, and is it mixed with anything when it's reconstituted? And so, coconut water has become so popular. It's just important to make sure you're examining and know the source. And if it's just good, solid, organic coconut water, I think you're plenty safe to drink it every day.
Yeah, here we have fresh, the whole fruit, and then we cut and we drink.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Of course. Yeah, I bet it's delightful.
Okay, Eddie, thank you so much for being here with us. Okay, so we'll see you again next time.
Thank you, Perry. Have a good evening.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.